Hello, I'm Soycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. I was browsing Google Maps this morning when I first heard of the Baltimore Bridge collapsing. This is the Francis Scott Key Bridge and it is a very dramatic collapsing of an entire structure. It is something that immediately I would love to tell you my first thoughts were with, oh my god, I hope if anyone was on it that they're okay now. And although I do think that's true, my first thoughts was, oh, so that is a bridge, right? It's a bridge that could carry vehicles. It was a highway bridge. And so do you think that that bridge is still on Google Maps? That was my first question, and my second question was, do you think the bridge should be shown on Google Maps? And it's interesting because you'd figure everyone would agree on the answer to that, but if we go into it right now, maybe you'll be fascinated to learn that Google has kind of gone for an approach that is halfway between these two, showing the bridge very clearly existing here in Google Maps, despite the fact that, well, it's in the ocean right now, and also then letting you know that you really can't go this way because they've got this big red alert symbol, which lets you know about the Department of Transportation with their Facebook and the Baltimore City Fire Department Facebook. We've got updates on X, formerly Twitter. We've got top stories from across the news. In other words, you can learn about the news with what's happening on this bridge so that if you were in the area, you don't have to think like, oh, I guess I'll take the I-695 as a diversion route. But then the next question is actually, wait, will Google Maps redirect you away from it? Because obviously you'd expect that it's not going to lead anyone towards this because there's no bridge to go on, but I wanted to find out. And so for Armistead to say Edgemere, which sounds like a RuneScape place to be honest, as you can see, it will direct you all the way around. Unless, weirdly enough, you try to put it somewhere on the highway, at which point it says, yeah, the highway is closed, but that's the way you've got to go. And so, fun fact, you can get Google to give you directions across the highway, again, across a highway and a bridge, which I would love to tell you can cross right now, but I have learned recently you definitely cannot. And this is something which is, again, there is a real human toll to this. There is a real human cost. There are people right now doing the really honest and good work of trying to save those people. But there is a deeper question that comes out of this because Google is now actively showing a bridge that we all know and all can see is not there. And this is an interesting point about what do you think Google Maps should show? Because if you approach that question from the very first principles, you might say, well, obviously Google Maps should show the world. And that's very easy, we all agree, except actually there are two versions of the world, isn't there? Should Google Maps show the world that we see and believe as humans, or should Google Maps show the world that exists? In case you think those two things are the same, there are many great examples where these two things don't line up perfectly, and a great example of this would be borders. Obviously, I mean, you could argue that borders don't really exist in the physical world, but they literally do. There are border checkpoints and what things you've got to go through, but then there's a more interesting case of borders with stuff like, let's take Crimea. This is legally a part of Ukraine. Ukraine did not agree to it being annexed by Russia, and the whole of the international community agrees that this is Ukrainian territory, legally speaking. It is, but despite that, even when it was Ukraine's, there was a huge Russian military base, and now that it is annexed by Russia informally, this is all Russian territory. They vote in Russian elections, etc., etc., etc. And so this is a weird case of the world kind of wants to look at that and say, yeah, it doesn't matter that Russia is in control of it, it belongs to Ukraine, but that's not very useful for a map to show you, you might argue. And so the kind of compromise they have is this weird zigzag line, but it basically proves that getting involved in basically drawing the maps of the world means you have to get involved with the ideas that create it, because yeah, I would make a decent argument that although we do not want Russia to have this, they definitely do have it. There's no realistic attempt by Ukraine to retake it, and it's kind of like eventually if someone breaks into your house, they can't just say they own that house, but after enough time when they're in there illegally, you say, well, I really don't like that you own it, but I would have to admit that it's you, and then eventually, I know, the city will start charging you taxes and you have to start paying utility bills, because eventually when you steal something, it becomes yours. A fact I don't really like about the real world, but a fact that seems to be how every country is built, at least at some point, right? And so when you look at borders like Russia, when you look at, India and China, you can see that they've got several borders to kind of show like, yeah, there's line of controls, there's the actual lines that they have are kind of changing a little bit every single day, you could argue. And so where where is the border between these places? Having all of them on the map is just the easiest way to avoid getting in trouble with India or China, but it's also not very useful, right? And so now when we come to places like this bridge, should Google Maps be showing every bridge that officially exists, even the ones we very clearly know not to? Well, this is a complicated one, right? Because obviously, if you are to say that Google should show the world how it is, as soon as they heard about this news, someone at Google should have been jumping up and being like, oh god, that bridge, again, I've seen video, that bridge definitely doesn't exist right now, and then they should have been like, okay, let's cut it off from Google Maps, because then anyone who is going through this area would be 100% sure that there is no highway over there. However, you could make the argument that if this was how Google was going to do things, because with a bridge, that's particularly important, because crossing a river is a hard thing for humans to do otherwise, but you could make the argument that, say, let's say this stretch of I-70 here is closed, that when this stretch is closed for the weekend, that also should be vanished from Google Maps, that there shouldn't be an I-70 that's there, but the reason that you would keep it, despite, let's just imagine this is closed, this tiny little stretch between the Poplar Springs United Methodist Church and this highway ramp, if this was closed, and was vanished from Google Maps, someone who was planning a journey for the future might think, oh, there's no highway there, what a weird gap in it, and therefore might plan an alternative journey. And so you need to know both how the world is at this current moment, but also you need to know where the world is going to be and what human beings are planning around that. And so, for example, you might need to know that, yeah, well, if there's a highway there, even if you can't use it because of bad weather, I believe that happens a lot on the west of the country, like, well, you know, we do want to have this highway system, but maybe we're going to have some real bad weather because we're up in the mountains somewhere. When the highway's closed, it's still important to know that it exists, right? I think that is fair to say. And so that is where I believe that this bridge is very fascinating in its own way. So this bridge will presumably be rebuilt. We do not know the timeline. It will take again, there's a lot of other more important things they're going to focus on than giving timelines about the rebuilding, but at some point this bridge will exist again. And so is it fair to leave the highway there? And you know, in a way, this map is not showing a physical diagram of Baltimore. That is definitely not what Baltimore looks like from above, but instead is showing a useful diagram. It's showing the official diagram of where the highways go, and so I-695 is going to cross the river again, probably, and so in the meantime, it shows that the concept is there. There is an official state, or I guess federal designated highway in this case, and that federal designated highway crosses the river. There's just no physical means to do that right now. But then I would counter that argument again to kind of muddy the waters a bit here and say, do you think that if they were going to announce a brand new bridge, call it I-995, right? And that I-995 would go from here all the way up to there, would you say that Google Maps should add that bridge to Google Maps, even if the highway's been designated, before the bridge is open? That is another question too. But you know, let's say the bridge is being built, but they've already designated it and they say, yeah, there is a highway there. Should Google Maps acquiesce to the local government who are saying, yep, there's a brand new highway here? Or should they say, no, there is no bridge on which to drive, therefore it doesn't show up on the map? And so in the case of this highway, should they say the same? Or does the fact that something's been destroyed and is going to just come back, does that change things? In a way, this is kind of like doing road maintenance. They've looked at how bad the road is and they've said, oh, yep, that's fully underwater. We're going to rebuild that from scratch. But that's something that can happen with any road that goes along the sea. I mean, it could happen to, this little stretch here. If this Winchester diamond floods and all the road is damaged, they had to destroy it and build it again. You wouldn't say it should be removed from Google Maps, or maybe you would, but I think it's an interesting case. Roads are one of the very few things that Google does, but they always are having to grapple with this reality of the fact that the way that humans look at the world and the way that the world actually is are always slightly different. Again, the fact that you see countries at all is a human concept. I mean, again, the governments very much do exist and borders very much do exist, but they are very much things that if we all stop believing in one day, would go away. And the same is true for highways. I mean, the only thing that makes the highway notable is like the design standards of it and the speed limits and the designation of who pays for it. But what if they stop paying for it and the speed limits change and they narrow it or widen, another highway? There are all these questions of like, yeah, we make standards to simplify things, but lots of things escape those simplified versions. And so just to show you something fun, by the way, one of the cool things you can do with Google is you can see, so there's a few interesting cases of like land that changes over time. So take a look, for example, over here. This is, so the River Thames is actually a tidal river. I think that makes it officially an estuary, but whatever. The River Thames is a tidal river, and so actually the level of it is going up and down all the time. And so if you look right here in Google Maps, you can see a beach. Should that beach be counted as, land, or should that be counted as sea? It is kind of in between, right? And so what they go with is this gray marking, but then they way overuse this gray marking, so it goes all the way up to here, like where this hotel is. And so you might think if you're in the Intercontinental London, the O2, and IHG, which is the official full name, obviously, but if you're going there, you might think that it's a beach until you zoom in, at which point it gets less specific. There are all sorts of, also, looking at these, how do you know that they're tunnels and not bridges? I mean, to me, it's very obvious that this is the Blackwall Tunnel, but maybe not to everyone. And speaking of things that aren't obvious to everyone, there are if you want to see how things change over time, one of my favorite tools for Google Maps is let me show you a fun one, by the way. I was looking recently at where they're going to build a new overground station, the very specific London thing here. But if you look right here, you can see, like, I believe there's this very beautiful new apartment complex that is going to be really near a new overground station. And so you look at it, it's like, okay, that's nice. And you look back in time, you can see something fun, which is that, like, oh, yeah, so at one point this was a furniture, bedrooms, kitchens, so, it's like a very warehousey area. And then at some point, someone clearly started buying up the place, and okay, now they start advertising it with this hoarding. Eventually, the buildings start going up, and they need like a bunch of cement there, and then eventually, wow, look, the buildings appear out of nowhere. That's incredible, and you can do something else that's fun. You can look around, and you can see like, oh yeah, look, there's this house, there's this bridge, there's this very rundown looking pub. But if you look through time, something fun happens, which is the rundown pub. 14 years later, they put scaffolding outside of it. So, I mean, that's nice, I guess. Anyway, with that said, I think it's really interesting to look around anywhere and see how things change. And another example of this is I was looking at London Bridge is a big bridge, right? Just while we're talking about bridges, and you can see something fun, which is that the bridge currently looks like this. This is just how I imagine it. But if we go out to this junction, which is like the messiest junction I've ever seen, and we look backwards, and then we go forwards and backwards in time, you can see that in 2008, it used to be 3 lanes of traffic, whereas in 2022, it's 1 lane, and then this mega double-wide bus lane, because even back then, you could see just how many buses were using this. Anyway, I think it's interesting. Maybe you think this is interesting. I hope... I want to be clear here that the tragedy is important, that people fix that, and that is very much not the job of YouTubers like me to do. But if you are in the capacity where you can help, if even, being nice to some people on the internet would help, do whatever you've got to do. However, I don't think empty platitudes and saying thoughts and prayers really is an important thing here. And I hope that using this as a way to learn about the world makes you a better person so that you can design boats that don't crash into bridges, or bridges that aren't destroyed when boats crash into them. And then we won't have to have any disasters in the future. Yeah, gotcha. Anyone who tries to say that this video is insensitive. Speaking of insensitive, have you considered buying food on Amazon? Use my link down below and I will get some money, I believe. Yep, nailed that. Perfect. Okay, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. And thank you, by the way, to my newest Patreons. The number went up. Look, you can see that we went from having 29 to 30 to 31. So thank you. Appreciate the money that I will use solely for squandering on kebabs and, I don't know, videos about tragedies. Goodbye.